Hello and welcome to the York Creatives podcast. My name is Ben Porter, and each week you can join me as I chat to someone from York's creative community. This week's guest is Layla Grainger. Layla is a creative consultant and the founder of the northern branch of London Terrariums York. With a background that includes working as a graphic designer and a workplace consultant before starting her own small business, Layla is passionate about human-centred design and enjoys taking a cross-disciplinary approach to her work. In this episode, we cover life lessons learnt through taking on a non-linear career path, with Layla passing on her advice to others who find themselves working outside of the corporate world. We chat about the importance of pausing every now and again to remind yourself of what you've managed to accomplish, and about the areas we can make improvements as a city to help support more freelancers and startups. Layla, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So it's great to finally meet you in person after we've had a few exchanges by emails.
Yeah.
And I'm quite excited to dig into a bit of your background and some of the things you've worked on, because from the information you've sent in and from doing a bit of research, it seems like you've done quite a lot of different things.
Yeah, it wasn't the most straightforward career path.
So before we get into that, I was wondering if I asked somebody who knows you really well, perhaps a partner or a family member, if I asked them to describe you as a person, what do you think they would say?
Oh, that's a really good question. Probably that she's quite creative. I think no matter what I've done in my career, it always ends up being something a bit creative and not the most normal. So I think creativity is one thing they'd say, and hopefully something about I love people, or I'm just a people person. And I think but the parts of my jobs that I've always enjoyed the most are the ones where I'm up front talking to someone rather than just behind my computer doing something. I really like interacting with people, understanding people, figuring out what they need and trying to have solutions for those problems, I think.
So on the creativity, why do you think that is? Was there a particular formative experience which pushed you towards that, or was it more a culmination of things?
Yeah, I think it's funny because my dad's side of the family are like medics, doctors, lawyers, that kind of career path that's like set out for you from the beginning. And I always wished I was interested in that, but I was always kind of floating around trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But it was always something creative. I loved creative writing. I loved like drawing and art and design when I was younger. And I think my mum's an artist, so I definitely took it from her side of the family. So I started off actually studying graphic and media design. So in my family, I was the creative one, especially from my dad's side. So I think that's probably where it would come from initially anyway.
And when you were studying and at school and things like that, did you, because I've had a look on your LinkedIn and I can see on there you got quite good grades.
Yeah.
Being someone who's quite good at academic stuff, did you ever feel a bit of pressure to push you away from the creative stuff towards academic things?
Definitely, yeah. Big time, especially because in my family as well, that was quite common to kind of go that route. But I was also the kind of person that was just kind of good at everything. I never had one, subject that I excelled in above all of them. And I was really envious of people that kind of had that, almost like their career path was chosen for them. They knew what they were going to do because they were really good at that one thing. And I was just kind of a jack of all trades. I just was able to get by on whatever I was doing. And I definitely felt that pressure to go into a more academic route. But I think luckily because my mum's creative, there was that influence in my life, and she kind of, again, guided me, and my art teacher at school was amazing, and really encouraged me just to, you can make money from creative things. It's not just painting and drawing. So I think that was a big influence, yeah. Yeah,
having that supportive network is really important, and I do really feel sorry for people who don't have that. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the key moments. So say between leaving education and right up until when you left London, what are some of the key milestones there?
Oh, well, I think one of the first big key milestones was that I did an art and design foundation degree. I really enjoyed art at school, and that was a lot of kind of painting and drawing, but I really didn't think you could make a career of it. And my art teacher actually really pushed me she encouraged me, and she said, there's options there. A lot of people do this foundation degree. I had no idea what it was, but I was like, you know what, I don't know what I want to do at uni yet. Let's go for it. And the idea is you try a variety of kind of artistic subjects. And there was graphics, there was 3D modelling, there was textiles, surface design, lots of really interesting things I'd never had a chance to explore at school. We didn't even have graphics at school. It was just plain art. So I did that for the year and actually fell in love with graphics. I really liked typography. I liked the kind of branding, advertising element of it. And that was a big step for me because it helped me to decide what I wanted to study at uni, which ended up being graphics. And that was the turning point, because I wouldn't have gone into a creative industry without having had that year's experience. So that was a big one for me. I also think deciding to study in London was a really big thing. I actually grew up, well, I was born in Israel, but I grew up in Wales. Mm-hmm. And out of the course on our foundation degree, I think maybe 10% of people actually went further than kind of Bristol. That was like almost in Wales, you stepped out to Bristol, but you were close enough to be home. So there was very few of us that went further out. And I was so desperate to go to London because I knew it was a big creative hub and I just wanted the big city. And I'd always been in kind of a small place. So going to London and kind of finding that network of creatives was really helpful for me, and I think a really big step. And finally, I think finding Emma, who's actually the founder of London Terrariums, when I was looking to do something horticulturally as kind of like a side thing alongside my job, I found that Emma was setting up a terrarium shop near where I lived in South London, and I'd been kind of fascinated with what these terrariums were, and her taking me on board was like a really big step in my career. Just, it wasn't initially my main career at that point, but it's influenced a lot of what I do now.
So what do London Terrariums do? Somebody has no idea.
Yeah, well, a terrarium, or a lot of people say terranium, but it's actually terrarium. Terra means earth and arium is home. So it's almost like this home for the earth. And I really like that imagery. And if you've never seen one before, the idea is it's almost like a glass vessel, and you're gardening, you're planting these plants inside that glass vessel. But the thing that we do at London Terrariums, we do a lot of closed terrariums, and the closed ones actually create their own little ecosystem. So the plants start to water themselves. So as the plants photosynthesize, they produce heat and oxygen, and that will condense as water droplets on the glass, and it will trickle down, and essentially they water themselves, which I find really amazing. So we, at London Terrariums, we make them, but the main part of the business that I was brought in to do, and that I really have a passion for, were the workshops, and that was teaching people how to make those terrariums and getting to take one home and watch their ecosystem grow.
So timeline-wise, you were doing this, was this alongside your design consultancy, or was it before or after?
This was when I started off as a graphic designer, then I was kind of doing design consulting, and then I moved into workplace design. I really was drawn to research-led design. Graphics can be quite subjective, and I found that quite difficult to prove why one design was better than another to a client. So I kind of found myself looking into research-led design, and that led me to start becoming I became a workplace consultant and workplace strategist. And while I was doing that, that was in the more corporate side of my career. And I ended up dropping down to a 4-day week, which I totally advocate. I know it's a pay cut, but it's worth it for the mental well-being and just work-life balance. I thought it was really important at that point. And while I was on a 4-day week there, I did a horticultural course, and that then prompted me to look into doing something with that on the side of my day job.
Okay. So leaving London and coming to York, what prompted that decision?
Yeah. I mean, I love London. I think it's amazing, the kind of opportunities you get there. It's just not a very sustainable place to stay long term. And I don't think many people plan to be in London for the long term. And my partner and I, we were thinking of leaving London, for a while. It was always in the back of our mind that we weren't going to stay forever. And we actually had some friends who moved to York maybe 5 years ago. And one of them is like a born and bred Londoner. So I was quite interested and intrigued, what is this York place and why have they gone? And during those 5 years, we used to come up and visit. And every time we'd visit, I just fell in love with it a little bit more. And I think it's such a lovely balance between having the amenities of a big city, but not feeling like Birmingham or Manchester, or, if you want that big city vibe, I had it in London and that was fine, but we were looking for something different, but we also didn't want to go to some rural village, you wanted that balance in between. York is beautiful. I think having a place that you can wake up and pull open the curtains and be like, oh, there's greenery outside and it's got history. And I do think it's got a really emerging, exciting creative scene. And I was really kind of struck by that over even the last 5 years that we used to visit. New things were popping up here and there and more independent shops. And I know there's always been a lot of independent shops in York, which is, I think, great in itself. But yeah, new things are coming. And that was really exciting for me as well.
So when did you make the move?
We made the move 6 weeks before the first lockdown.
Right, okay. Good Good timing.
Yeah, exactly. It was a bit of an interesting acclimatization to a new city. We had those first 6 weeks and, we had lots of friends visiting and it was really fun and just setting up our home and getting to grips. And I was supposed to be starting some contracts for consulting work, and then lockdown hit and coronavirus came. And suddenly I found myself pretty much almost unemployed. I had a few bits of freelance work going on, but I was a bit like, oh, we've just moved to the city and we don't know that many people here. I don't have that many connections, and I don't have a proper job right now, which was actually really difficult. But my lifeline was actually London Terrariums York, like setting up the northern branch of the business. That's actually been a really big part of keeping me sane and busy through the pandemic.
So tell me about some of the things you've been doing with it.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing was, the way it's panned out was not my intention at all. Speaking to Emma when I was in London, we were thinking about, just franchising the business in York, and my plan was just basically to do the workshops. I had no interest in kind of setting up a shop or anything like that. It's a huge commitment, and because it was always intended to be a side thing, I didn't want to do that. So I was just kind of setting up the workshops when we first moved, and I had about 4 booked in before the pandemic hit, and suddenly I couldn't do the workshops, and I was just like, oh, what am I doing then? And I can't do this. And I also noticed that I had no platform to communicate with people that were York-based or Yorkshire-based. Because I was just going to be using the London platform because it has, plenty of followers as it is, and we have a website built, and I was just going to piggyback from that with the franchise. But it pushed me to set up my own Instagram, which was, I really didn't want to do it. The thought of starting with like 1 follower from the very beginning and having to build it was so daunting, and I really was, it wasn't my plan at all, but I had the time and I thought, you know what, why not? Let's start now. So building the social media accounts and building a website for the York page that I could advertise York things. That was all kind of the initial projects in the first lockdown. And then starting to actually sell terrariums, because the workshops obviously couldn't go ahead during the kind of national lockdown. So I was forced to do something else, and I ended up just kind of buying extra stock and starting to make them and trying to sell them. So that was a new avenue that I wasn't planning on doing up here.
Mm-hmm. So the period between realising that the workshops aren't going to go ahead and then getting to a place where you feel like actually this is starting to get a bit of momentum, how long was that roughly?
So the first, when the workshops can go ahead with the first lockdown, those first few months were very much just starting to build the social media and the website and things. And then when things opened up, I think it was July, when restaurants could open again and venues were kind of available to run workshops. From July to August, I was just kind of trying to get new workshop dates. August and September and October were really good in terms of workshops were selling out. There were more followers on the Instagram, and there was some kind of name getting out there. That was really exciting. And actually November was my busiest month booked in so far. And it was such a really difficult thing to swallow when we had the second national lockdown, because I had to postpone all of those plans again. And I think I'd actually just got, there were lots of workshops, but I was also, there's a really gorgeous gift shop on Bushy Road called Noun, and they started stocking my terrariums, I think 3 days before the lockdown happened again. So I literally dropped them off, so excited. And then the next lockdown came and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's not going to do much now. So this month, again, I thought, what am I going to do? Workshops are the biggest part of the business, and it's the part that I enjoy the most, but it's coming up to Christmas. It's time to kind of push terrariums as Christmas gifts, because they make great Christmas gifts. And so actually I'm so grateful for all of the support that people are just rallying around independent businesses right now, and I think that's really needed and also really wonderful. And personally, I've benefited from it so much just to keep me busy. I've had so many orders this month, and then making preparations for December, which will hopefully be a really busy month as well with workshops. So
yeah, that was going to be my next question. How do you stay motivated with all this doubt around you? Is it just people, or have you got any other tips and tricks? If you get down, what do you do? It's
such a difficult. I mean, I'm not the most I think my friends would probably say I'm a very positive person, but I think initially when I'm hit with any kind of change in plan, I struggle quite a lot. I'm someone who likes to know what's coming next and to have my calendar booked with what's coming up and knowing my next steps. And I find it really difficult initially when something inhibits my plan. I'm almost like, I stop and I don't know what to do. And I think I'm lucky in the sense that I don't have a full-time job right now. That means that if I was working full-time and trying to do this on the side, I probably wouldn't have had the energy to give to it as I have now. But I think being in the middle of this pandemic, when you're kind of twiddling your thumbs like, well, I have to push this forward, like I need to. And that kind of gives you you just have to. I don't have other things at the moment that I can rely on. And I have some smaller freelance projects, but nothing that's looking long term. And I think this, although the plan is not to be doing this full time, it's always to be a part-time thing. You need to give a small business your full attention initially. I think it's really difficult to do that part-time. And then obviously really supportive friends and family and people who, every little thing that you do, they're like, oh, that's so great. And you're doing a really good job. And you just have to be like, yeah, actually, if I reflect back to what I was doing 6 months ago, this has grown and like steps have been made. And that's encouraging to see in a short space of time.
It's so easy to forget where you've got to, isn't it? That's why I keep a journal, because I write down all the things I want to do. And then
so helpful.
The last day of the year, I always read back and I'm always like, oh, I've done loads of these things, but you forget and you don't sort of appreciate where you get to.
Definitely. It's so easy to focus on what you haven't done. I think that's a really good tip, is just pause every now and again and say, actually, what have I accomplished? And I'm a big lover of lists. Like I write lists of everything that I need to do. And it is nice to see those old lists and say, oh, actually, like I've crossed those off and I wanted to do that and I've done that. That's really encouraging.
So one thing that I wanted to talk to you about was focus, because you mentioned that when the small business was growing, you have to give that your attention, but it might not perhaps be everything that you want to do. You've got freelance work, you've got other stuff.
Yeah.
How do you find balancing all these different aspects of your life?
I'm definitely someone who likes to keep busy, and I find it really difficult if I don't have lots of things going on. And that was my initial real struggle with the first hit of the first lockdown, was that that first week I had nothing. I knew I had some freelance bits coming up, but I really didn't have much to focus on. And I found that really difficult. So I started making lists of things that I could be doing. And obviously building this business was one of them. When I was a graphic designer, I worked for a few startups, and I really enjoyed that because I really love that kind of touch and go. Everything is really creative, ideas are being bounced around, and it's a lot more kind of creative and free than working in a corporate environment. But I learned a lot about small businesses and the kind of struggles that a small business goes through. And I knew that if I wanted it to grow quickly, I'd have to give it a lot of my attention. And I guess in a way, I was lucky that I didn't have as many things going on as usual to be able to give it that attention. But I do think that when you're passionate about something, you find the time. So even when you're working on another freelance piece of work, you might want to sign off at like 6-7 o'clock, but then in the evening you're like, oh, well, you know what, I'm just going to do a bit of research into this or find another supplier for this. And it does mean that your work-life balance is very blurry. You're kind of working all the time. And I think anyone who's freelance or kind of runs a startup, you, especially initially, until you put those boundaries in place, you just have to expect that there aren't really many boundaries between when you work and when you don't work. You kind of fit it around everything. And it's also the benefit because you're able to choose your working hours and you might want to take an extra long lunch break. But it is something to bear in mind that you're just working all the time, but it doesn't always feel like work when it's something that you really enjoy. So I think that's the thing that motivates you. You'll know if it's the right thing because you'll be enjoying the stuff that you're having to do for it.
Yeah, it's really important to make sure you pick the right thing because
Definitely.
I think sometimes, I mean, I've done it myself. I've picked something to work on because I want this final output or to do this thing or achieve this thing. And then when you're in it, it's like, this sucks. Why am I putting myself through this?
Exactly.
Although one thing I really struggle with is once I've said I'm going to do a project is letting it go. Do you struggle with that, or are you able to sort of be very disciplined and be like, this isn't serving me, I'm going to do something else?
Yeah, I think it's always tricky because you always have invested something into that initially and you'll have put some time or effort into it. But I think it's, if you can, like, let it go and let it go, you know, kind of cold turkey. I think it's it becomes really difficult if you're always dwelling on things that you could have done, should have done, I didn't get a chance to do as best as I wanted to. There's just too much to be doing to kind of be focusing on that. So I try, if possible, to just, if that hasn't served me, let it go and let's get busy with something else so I don't have to think about it too much.
So going back to York, what was your opinion on the city before you came here and from the visits that you got, and how does that compare to actually living here?
Yeah. I think I mean, York obviously is very just aesthetically beautiful, but also I think just the number of independent businesses, I was always struck by that. Obviously London has so many, but I haven't seen the kind of extent in many other places. I think York is really lovely for that, whether it's restaurants, gift shops, any business, there's lots of them. So my initial thought, I think particularly for me as well, because I was interested in this aspect of the city, was that it was very accommodating for startups and kind of new ideas, which I think it is to an extent. But I think now living here, I have noticed that there's so much more that can be done, and even things like pop-up spaces, which are just all over London. You can easily, it's expensive, but you can find those locations if you're a new business that you want to put your work out there. And I was so surprised that York doesn't have many of those spaces at all. For a city that I feel has so much creativity, it's got 2 universities, which was a big selling point for me, because it means there's young people with fresh ideas in this relatively small city. But there aren't the spaces for them necessarily to put their ideas out there. I think venues like Spark, which have come about recently in York's history, and they are really amazing for that kind of thing, because there aren't many places for a new business to find its feet, and I think space is super important for that. So yeah, I think that's one thing that I've noticed now that I live here, and it's something that I think I feel quite passionate about, and I'm going to hopefully be able to be involved in that conversation in York.
So we're nearly at 25 minutes. Is there anything that I've not asked about which you want me to ask you about?
Maybe just quickly talking about an unconventional career path, because I mentioned that I did struggle with the idea of not having a very definitive career path, and I wished I was wanting to be a doctor and I had those 7 years planned out for me. And I think at school you're not often exposed to all of the different things that you can get involved, especially in the creative industries. Depending on your school's kind of art department, you just might not have any idea. And I definitely had no idea of half the things I could do. I didn't know workplace consultants existed, or people who thought about space and how it affects people. Like, that was just totally off my radar. And I think really, for anyone, advice, if you're picking what you want to do at university, don't do something that, don't just pick something because you have to. I would wait and take that year out, or do a foundation degree or something. Give yourself an opportunity to have exposure to new things, and then maybe choose that degree. Or maybe you choose not to go to university and you do an apprenticeship. I think those are amazing, especially in the creative industries. And don't be so set. I'm telling myself, like my old self, don't be so set on what your career needs to look like, because every job, even if it wasn't, your ideal job in that moment, it gives you some kind of skill, some kind of background, which you bounce off for your next job. Then it builds up your career, even if it's not what you thought it would be. I think all of those experiences are so valuable. And I think for myself, I've worked in a bunch of different studios, and I was frustrated because I thought I was wasting time in different places. But actually, all of those little experiences have been so valuable the further I've got along in my career to just be able to draw from. So yeah.
That's really good advice.
Thanks.
So what's coming up next for London Terrariums?
Yeah, the exciting things that we're all back up and running for December. All the workshops are going ahead, and obviously taking into account COVID guidelines, and people will be spaced in the ways they need to, but the workshops are running, which is great. A couple have sold out, but there's still plenty of tickets left if people want to get them. And I've actually got a market stall at the Spurriergate Centre on next week, I think. So there'll be a couple of markets coming up through December, so just keep a lookout for those.
Great. And if people want to find out more about you, where do they go?
Yeah, Instagram probably is my best platform. It's London Terrariums York on Instagram. It's confusing because there's the normal London Terrariums and the York version, so head for that one if you want to know the kind of York-based things.
Cool. Well, we'll put the link in the description.
Perfect.
And to your website as well.
Thanks.
Great.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.